In this two-part interview, we speak with two guest experts on the Defense Personal Property Program, or DP3 Program for short, with Director Mr. Rick Marsh and Mr. Bradley Richardson, an attorney advisor for USTRANSCOM. The DP3 program deals with the movement of household goods and POVs, non-temporary storage, and the DoD management framework. We discuss the challenges faced by the DP3 program, innovative solutions that the team is working on, and how they conduct strategic communication with their stakeholders. Here are a few clips from part one of today's show.
Really, the program, it's huge. It's about a $3 billion a year enterprise. We do roughly 400,000 of these moves a year. There's about 950 household goods providers. One way to enforce standards is to enforce a contract. When you have 400,000 contracts running around there per year, how are you going to do that?
Welcome to the Air Force Judge Advocate General's Reporter Podcast, where we interview leaders, innovators, and influencers on the law, leadership, and best practices of the day. And now to your host from the Air Force Judge Advocate General School.
So welcome to another episode from the Air Force Judge Advocate General School at Maxwell Air Force Base. I'm your host, Major Rick Hanrahan. Remember, if you like the show, please consider subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform and leaving a review. This helps us to grow and outreach to the JAG Corps and beyond. In today's interview, we plan to discuss the Defense Personal Property Program known as the DP3 Program, which deals with movement of household goods, movement of POVs, non-temporary storage, and other things as well. And we have two guests that we're going to speak with today. Mr. Rick Marsh, the director of the DP3 program, and Mr. Bradley Richardson, an attorney advisor for USTRANSCOM. Gentlemen, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having us.
So Mr. Rick Marsh is a member of the Senior Executive Service, or SES, and is the current director of the Defense Personal Property Program, known as the DP3 program at U.S. Transportation Command at Scott Air Force Base, Illinois. USTRANSCOM conducts globally integrated mobility operations, leads the broader joint deployment and distribution enterprise, and provides enabling capabilities in order to protect and sustain the joint force in support of national objectives. Mr. Bradley Richardson is an attorney advisor for USTRANSCOM. In his military capacity, he is a judge advocate, individual mobilization augmentee, or IMA, assigned to AFJACL as a litigation attorney. So, Mr. Marsh, could you start off by providing a little more background on your current position and what you do?
Hey, absolutely. Hey, thanks again for having us. So as the director of the Defense Personal Property Program, my job is to be an advocate and a champion for DoD families in the relocation process, to integrate the operational, contractual, financial, IT aspects of the Defense Personal Property Program, and then just drive broader reforms.
And Mr. Richardson, can you also provide a little more background on your current position and what you do?
Sure. I'm designated as an acquisition attorney. And, when you look at my, personnel document, just says your typical stuff, contract reviews, in litigation. If we go up to the Government Accountability Office or the Court of Federal Claims, I'll serve as of counsel, which basically means I have cradle to grave legal responsibility of a particular contract, leading all the way up to award and performance of that contract. As far as in the Defense Personal Property Program, I tend to take more of a guidance role and be more integrated as a team member. I end up being at the very, very basic groundwork of a particular action that we're taking. It might be a contract, it may be reforming of rules, but I'm really part of the beginning of any type of change that Mr. Marsh and his team are planning to do.
Well, thank you for that. So kind of diving into the substance of our discussion today, Mr. Marsh, I kind of wanted to start off by just asking you a very broad question of what is the Defense Personal Property Program?
The Personal Property Program is the mechanism, it's the enterprise that supports the relocation of DoD personnel to their next duty assignment or to their home of record in case of a retirement. Really, the program, it's huge. It's about a $3 billion a year enterprise. And I break it down into four components. There's an element that handles household goods and unaccompanied baggage shipments between duty stations. We do roughly 400,000 of these moves a year. There's about 950 household goods providers that have signed up to do business with us. We don't have a formal contract with any of them currently, and we spend a little over $2 billion a year in that element. We have one element of the program that deals with the movement of privately owned vehicles. We do just over 60,000 vehicle shipments a year. We store about 7,000 shipments a year. We do have a single award contract industry partner that we deal with, and this is about $200 million a year in annual spend. We have a third element that manages the non-temporary storage of household goods when service members typically in conjunction with an overseas assignment. At any given time, we have about 60,000 lots in storage. There's another 800 or so providers that support this program. Again, no formal contract. And there's about $100 million in spend here. And then the fourth element is DoD's management framework. Again, it's pretty significant. At the installation level, there's about 300 offices that the services own that handle the counseling, doing the quality assurance tasks associated with a household goods pickup or delivery. The services have another 42 regional shipping offices that handle what we refer to as the back office functions, right? They do the ordering of services with industry. Between these offices, it's about it's several thousand people and a couple $100 million in spend just managing those. And then that management framework deals with a broader set of stakeholders across the DoD. Integrating with the personnel community, integrating with the logistics community, the military claims offices, the Defense Travel Management Office in terms of entitlement, and then the OSD staffs, right? Both on the acquisition and sustainment side, and then the personnel and readiness side. So it's a pretty significant program. I mean, it really touches just about every member of the DoD, and certainly ripe for reform.
Well, thank you, sir. Yes, this program is clearly a massive program, and I think everyone that's been in the DoD for any period of time, whether military or civilian, has had personal experiences with it, right, from PCSing and to other issues where this touches folks. Could you maybe also briefly address just the history of this program and maybe what you've even seen through your career, how it's changed over time?
There's been some aspect of the program, as long as folks have been moving around the globe. But I guess the most important aspects of the history are the issues that we see with it, right? The enduring issues that we've seen literally for decades. One, that our assignment cycle exerts a lot of strain on industry capacity, particularly during the summer months. The second, that our very transactional nature of our relationship really prevents us from capitalizing on the capacity that is available. And then the third, internally, that management framework I talked about is just internally we're very fractured. Those are the problems that we're trying to solve, and I think the foundational themes of our history, right, that we'll revisit pretty often during this conversation.
Yes, sir. And you had mentioned that there are certain aspects within these different sections of the program that are fairly ripe for review or perhaps to reevaluate kind of how we do those. Is there anything there that maybe you'd like to address?
Well, I think the three things that General Alliance has us laser focused on is in improving the quality capacity within the program. I think we've absolutely seen some improvements over the last couple of years in terms of customer satisfaction surveys, but there's still 4 to 5% of the customers that report an unsatisfactory or a poor move. When things go wrong, things seem to go really, really wrong. So really focused on raising the level of standard within the program. The second thing he has us focused on is accountability, right? I mean, as I mentioned in the overview, we have a transactional relationship with over 1,000 providers with no formal contract, right? So from an accountability perspective, there's a lot that to be desired. And then just internally, from a responsibility perspective, when folks have a problem, who can they go to for help? Who is ultimately responsible for the management of this program? And there's a ton of stakeholders, and General Alliance has put TRANSCOM into the breach as far as responsibility for this program goes, which is a role I really enjoy and welcome.
And for me and everybody that has worn the uniform, that has worked that is working right now in this reform effort. It's a very personal thing. I spent 4 years on active duty, had 2 moves. For JAGs in particular, it's really the first military thing that you do. You go and you take the oath. Most of us are called direct commission officers. So we take the oath. We're officers before we even go to any training. And you really don't know what to do at that moment. However, you get this list, and one of the things on the list is to go and get counseled for your move, because you're going to be going to a new duty location. And so that's really the first thing that you do that's actually military. So I went to Fort Belvoir to the Army personal property office, and I went through my pre-move counseling. And then I went off to commissioned officer training, and my wife had to deal with it. That was her first introduction to the military, which was a household good move. And it didn't go great, I'll be honest. And so for those of us that are involved in this, it's a very personal thing to help the people that are moving, the service members, DOD and their families, to have better household good moves, better POV moves, etc. It's a very personal thing, and it's something that everybody in the program is really committed to.
Yes, thanks for that comment, and I can kind of concur with that too. I mean, similar situation with my wife through a move, and that was an overseas move as well, so even added to the complexity of it. And I think we all, as military members, can relate. We've all had different experiences with these moves, and I know you both had mentioned, as we were prepping for this discussion today, just about how the current system is set up, and how you mentioned, Mr. Marsh, there's about 900 providers or so, I believe you said, for movement of household goods. I guess what's the current status of that, as far as are they looking to try to make this more of a streamlined process in some way, or where's kind of you and your team on that particular issue?
No, that's a great question. So I think before I get into the solution that has been proffered, right, the global household goods contract, which addresses that household goods element of the program, I think it's important just to talk about why the challenges we see in the status quo, right? And we have briefings full of facts and figures, but our inability to consistently deliver a quality capacity, an acceptable level of performance at the curb, really boils down to 3 figures. So the first is, as I mentioned, we spend over $2 billion a year in packing and transportation services. We're 15 to 20% of the domestic market, and we don't act like the major customer that we are, right? So part of it is about using our market share to raise the standard of service for military families. The second is that you mentioned the more than 900 providers. All of them again have met a minimum screening, right? They've all agreed to operate in line with our business rules, but we don't have an enduring contract with any of them. And then the third element, I mentioned those 42 regional shipping offices. So the way this works is that each of those 42 shipping offices deals with some subset of those more than 900 providers and awards business on a shipment by shipment basis. So this transactional approach means that we don't give industry any meaningful forecast of what they can expect to move, which means they don't have any real basis to invest in relationships with quality agents or assets to respond to what ends up being a very predictable summer period. So not only does that really fractured operational construct keep us from maximizing our market share and tapping into available capacity, it also stymies our efforts to hold industry accountable. We always get questions from families and from Congress about what we're doing to hold industry accountable, and there's a ton of activity. Last year the services issued 50,000 letters of warning and another 2,000 suspensions when industry partners operated outside the bounds of our rule set. But because they're handled by 42 separate offices, it doesn't translate into meaningful outcomes, right? I mean, a company could be suspended in one region and continue to operate in every other region. So that's what we're trying to get after. Again, change the conditions within which industry is operating to improve the level of service, improve our access to quality capacity, and really drive accountability in the program when things go wrong.
And then from a legal standpoint, Mr. Marsh shared a statistic earlier. There's 400,000 moves. Those are 400,000 what are called tenders. Those are little individual contracts between a transportation service provider and the government. And I never reviewed a tender. when I was at the base legal office. I didn't, and I still don't, and so one way to enforce standards is to enforce a contract. When you have 400,000 contracts running around there per year, how are you going to do that? So that's a big thing that from the legal side that we'd like to see corrected.
Yes, and I think we're going to be talking about this issue more as through this discussion. It's a fascinating one, and I think one that I know that everyone's looking at to see what we can do to improve. One of the other points here I wanted to kind of briefly discuss is the movement to COCOM, or the centralizing movement to a joint combat command that specializes in global logistics and war fighting, which is part of the program here. Would either of you like to discuss that?
Sure, I can dive on that. So to be clear, what we're talking about, that move to the U.S. Transportation Command staff, was just the program management staff, the staff that manages the business rules, the policy, develops the enabling IT. What we're not talking about is the C2 construct of that broader network of installation and shipping offices I talked about, right? I mean, that is still resident within the services and not part of the movement to the TRANSCOM staff. So until 2018, that program management staff, right about 60 people, was part of the Surface Deployment and Distribution Command. Again, an Army component of TRANSCOM. There were a few folks at TRANSCOM headquarters working policy issues. There was a separate section in what's called our Program Executive Office that managed the IT development. So you had the day-to-day management in one of our components, and then the policy and IT handled at the TRANSCOM staff. So our commander at that time moved that operational element that was in SDDC to the TRANSCOM staff.
And with that in mind, maybe we can kind of jump over to another topic, which is dealing with contracting, because so much of this is based on contract, as both of you have mentioned. Can one of you maybe just discuss that from a kind of a very general standpoint on how these contracts are set up? If there's an overview you could provide for the listeners.
I can do that. So as I said before, the current way that we do things is called a tender. If you've ever shipped a package through the post office, you essentially did a tender. It's a transportation bill to move something. And what we're moving towards is, rather than doing a whole bunch of tenders, we're moving towards doing single point contracts. So you have a move manager that is going to manage all the flow of household goods, private vehicles, both from point A to point B, but also maybe point A to temporary storage, and then ultimately someday to point B. So we're moving away from doing those individual tenders with individual service providers. And then we'll have essentially a prime contract that has lots of subcontractors, but there's always going to be that single point of contact that United States Transportation Command will have with a contractor. So when things go wrong, we know exactly who to call, rather than sorting through a whole bunch of layers of subcontractors. I can remember there was an issue with creating one of my wife's tables. It was something that her grandfather had left her, and we got approval to have a special crating. But the transportation service provider didn't have the crate, but we didn't know who to call, and it ended up getting through 3 or 4 layers of subcontractors before we got to the person who authorizes the crate. And so the result was it was shipped without a crate, and what do you know? It got damaged. So this will kind of change that, and then we just have that one single point of contact.
Yes, thank you for that. And as you gentlemen know, in this podcast show, we like to discuss things related to innovation and leadership. It seems to me that based on what your response is there, that this is a step in the right direction towards some new type of innovation within the contracting world. Would you say that's a fair statement?
I would. So we're going to do what's called an IDIQ contract, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract. So that means we're going to have task orders that are going to replace the tender system. And yes, we will have 400,000 task orders under at least the global household goods contract, not to mention the other contracts that we're working. When we're talking about innovation and contracting, I can hear every single lawyer out there saying, great, you did a contract. Oh my gosh. And usually when people come to me and say, hey, I want to do a contract to go do this thing, I usually ask them, well, why aren't we doing it? ourselves? Why isn't the Department of Defense or the military doing it themselves? Why don't we have the organic resources to do this? With that said, though, this is a little bit different where industry has always performed this function for us. It is not something that we're replacing a organic resource that we already have at our disposal. An example is some people always want to contract out aircraft maintenance. There are some aircraft maintenance contracts out there, but that is something that the Air Force does and does very, very well. And we need that function for warfighting. So that's not a good idea to always to contract something like that out. When you have something that we are traditionally doing with industry, then we need to change the way that we approach it. And so I came into global household goods in the middle of it, in the middle of while we were evaluating offerors who want to go perform this contract. And when I picked up what's called the performance work statements, which establishes all of the duties that we want the contractor to do, I expected to see a service contract because this is a service. And service contracts are usually pretty detailed, like maybe cleaning a building. There's 50 rooms in a building. We need the trash taken out. We need the floors mopped. We tell the contractor exactly what we want them to do. When I picked up this, I thought we were literally procuring what looked to be a weapon system. We had open-ended duties under there, but very specific standards. We need a contractor to do this general service. Here are your standards that we're going to hold you to, but you're going to tell us how you're going to do it. That's not usually what we do in a service contract, as I said before. So for example, from the performance work statement, we have some standards on how we want the offeror to interact with the customer. We don't want them to go through 3 or 4 layers of people to go get an answer to a question. So our standard is you're going to have a single point of contact. You're going to establish contact with the customer within 1 day of receiving a task order from us. And we have a scheduling timeline that we're going to hold you to. Now go out and tell us how you're going to do it. And then we let industry be the technological driver on this. We have market research on what the industry can do, but we're going to let them drive the innovation. So we didn't tell them how they're going to communicate with all of our different customers. The other thing that we're doing in this is we really flipped on who is the customer. Usually in government contracting, the government is the customer. You want to make the government happy. Here, we're saying that DoD civilians, DoD service members, and their families are the customer. TRANSCOM, certainly, we're going to be there holding you accountable, but we're going to be really feeding off what our customer base is providing us. And so I see that as innovative. It's very nuanced, but it is something that is different than what we normally do under a service contract.
And Mr. Marsh, you had mentioned earlier, at least with respect to the movement of household goods, that you had somewhere between 4 to 5% of an unsatisfactory rate. And some of your main initiatives are to improve standards in customer satisfaction and accountability. From your position as the director, what do you see, as far as innovation and/or leadership approaches that are being taken here?
No, so I think going back to Mr. Richardson's point on what the PWS looks like, right? So for a long time in the program, our focus was being very prescriptive on how industry should do things versus what we wanted to have happen at the curb. I mean, if you looked at our regs previously, it was very clear that every time an issue popped up, we wrote a rule to fix it, right? I mean, down to how thick craft paper has to be wrapping upholstery items, right? I mean, it's insane. Well, and the feedback we got from industry was, it was a deterrent to new entrants joining the program, right? I mean, we pay very competitive rates. I mean, we're a reliable customer, but we were an onerous customer, right? I mean, the rule sets we had were so complicated, it wasn't worth doing business with us. Again, I mentioned we're 20% of the market. There were customers who were choosing to do business with the other 80%, right? The purely commercial business, simply because we were too hard to do business with. So when we wrote the PWS, we spent a lot of time thinking about the outcomes that we wanted from the program, and honestly, it wasn't that hard to come up with those outcomes. I mean, we just listened to what families had been telling us all along, right? And it's They're not asking for VIP moves. They're not asking for white glove service. It's basic things, right? Just better communication. Just treat me with respect. Treat my belongings with respect. Answer the phone when I call. Solid IT, right? I mean, just a system that's not I don't have to be tied to a CAC and a government workstation to log in and hopefully figure out what's happening with my move. And then when things go wrong, just the knowledge, the certainty that industry will be held accountable when they fail customers. And I want to go back to the earlier discussion on it's easy to have a discussion on tenders and contracts, and to be clear, in my view, there's nothing inherently wrong with tenders, right? I mean, it is a tool in the department's toolkit. The problem with our program is that we let the program evolve in a manner that favored industry, right? And that's not industry's fault, right? I mean, industry is operating in the environment that we established. We have a lot of companies that are focused on delivering a quality product. A lot of them do a really great job on the customer service front. But there are also many companies who entered this program, they're in it, and now they view being in it as an entitlement. And as long as we're running this structure, we are tied really to the lowest common denominator of service available. And then, so this is where that transactional model comes in, right? That Brad talked about, shipment by shipment. We have really great companies that do a super job packing and storing household goods, but they're not IT companies, right? I mean, we can't expect them to deliver a world-class IT or even a standard IT system, right? I mean, I think about Uber in this instance, right? Not the takeaway can't be Marsh is trying to be the Uber of household goods, but think about how terrible Uber would be if every driver had its own IT interface. It only works because there's an umbrella entity that's providing that IT platform for all those independent operators to plug into.
Are we going to move to an app then for our movement of household goods?
So we are going to have a part of the contract is deploying a customer portal. Absolutely. We have proven that we cannot do it, right? I mean, I can't do basic things like send a text message that a driver's on the way to pick up your house. I can't do a very simple thing, that you see in every aspect of your life on the claims process that you can, I don't know, take a picture of damage and upload it into the claims portal, right? I mean, I can't do that. Industry's doing it today. So this is where Brad and I see it a little differently on the innovation front, and I understand his perspective on the nuanced innovative aspects on potentially in contracting. But from an innovation perspective in what we push to the curb, no, I'm just trying to change the conditions so that movers within the military system can have the same kind of experience that movers out of the military system have, right? I mean, we're not asking industry to develop anything new to us. We want industry to deliver to us what already exists in the marketplace today. Really, the difference is scale, right? I mean, we will be the biggest customer. As I see it, that's the main difference.
That concludes part 1 of the interview with Mr. Rick Marsh and Mr. Bradley Richardson. Please tune into part 2 where we continue the discussion on the DP3 program. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Air Force Judge Advocate General's Reporter Podcast. You can find this episode, transcription, and show notes, along with others, at reporter.dodlive.mil. We welcome your feedback. Please subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review. This helps us grow, innovate, and develop an even better JAG Corps. Until next time,
nothing from this show or any others should be construed as legal advice. Please consult an attorney for any legal issue. Nothing from this show is endorsed by the federal government, Air Force,
or any of its components.
All content and opinions are those of our guests and hosts. Thank you.